So for everybody out there who may not know Blake Butler, Blake has been one of the quiet heroes in the InfoSec community for a very long time. From my knowledge, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you've spent a good amount of time in pen testing, open source intelligence, deconstructing, reversing, a bunch of different tasks at hand in really refining the craft of, InfoSec as we call it today. I met you a few years ago, and I was just pretty impressed, and I really enjoyed your demeanor, and we've worked alongside each other, through barriers over the years. I don't really know what you're working on. You don't really know what I'm working on, but we keep kind of butting up into each other on different things. And so, the mic is yours. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell the folks out there, where you came from, what you're working on, and where you're going.
Yeah, totally. So like you said, my name is Blake Butler. I was previously the lead technical investigator for PayPal security threat intelligence team. Currently the emerging threats researcher. So I spend a lot of time looking at a lot of different threats to the organization, and that, varies from, DDoS attacks to malware to, in some cases, even physical acts of violence, which in many capacities, a lot of the tooling that you provide Dan comes extremely useful. But previously, in another, a few years back, I graduated from the University of Advancing Technology in Tempe, Arizona, which is very much baked into the sort of agency scene. We've got a lot of students that graduate from the university that go to 3-letter agencies. And so when I graduated in 2010, I went out to Fort Meade and did the whole interview process and got a conditional offer of acceptance with the National Security Agency. For various reasons, it ended up not working out. And so I ended up actually just working at the university for about 3 years. But the great thing about that was it was the most incredible playground, right? I mean, you can think of, this university that has all these different, Blade servers and ESXi boxes and PBX systems and, Cisco CCUX, like, VoIP systems and all these different things. And so naturally, right, a lot of the stuff gets set up, but it doesn't get secured very well. And so for 3 years, it was literally a playground for me to go and test and to prod and to poke and to find, different issues that were going on within the environment. And through my time there, I was able to find some pretty significant vulnerabilities, including stuff that allowed you to read some back-end information that should not have been publicly accessible. So that's where I sort of came from as far as my college years are concerned. Growing up, I think I've always had an interest in security. I remember one of the first things that I ever, I guess, would be considered hacked or manipulated was in school. In middle school, we had this thing called Accelerated Reader. And Accelerated Reader was this program where you had to read a book throughout the year or through the summer, and then you'd come back and you'd have to take these, these different tests over the books. And, like anybody else, I had better things to do in my summer. And so what I did was, I think it was in the 6th to 7th grade, I ripped the Accelerated Reader program off of the school computer and took it home and installed it. And installing it allowed me to set the admin password and then take the tests prior to going to school. Now, even though I did read the books in various SparkNote capacities, that was sort of like my first thing getting into some trouble with computers and learning basically just that interest of how this stuff worked. And a big part of, pushing me forward was the gaming industry. I think we see a lot of different people getting involved in information security, but originally just being interested in gaming. And that's the way that I was, being able to tinker or modify specific, features or abilities within certain games that I was playing was really what turned me on to getting a further, deeper understanding of how all this stuff connects together and how it works. And so yeah, I've been at PayPal for the past 5 years now. Like I said, I work on various information security incidents or issues. For a long time, I was helping drive a lot of technical incidents. So I was basically a part of the team that is the escalation point for the Security Operations Center. So if, these guys in the SOC don't understand what's going on, then we'd come in and provide a technical expertise on what's going on. And I focus a lot on money laundering and fraud. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of background. Yeah. So that's where I sort of come from.
That's awesome. I really like the gamification of everything. I remember reading this, like, there was some article in American, Scientific America a few years ago, probably maybe 20 years ago. And they had this article about, are all chess players that, win these titles, the grandmasters, are they all geniuses? And they kind of came away with, there's more data that supports that they're not all geniuses. They just know more pattern sets and how to react to them faster than anybody else. And so I've kind of always felt like, the strength in gamification and, looking at things from a gaming perspective and can I win? Can I cheat it? Can I, get these puzzle pieces to work has always been kind of in the back of my head. And it's nice to hear that you've got the same kind of how you were born into InfoSec with that mindset, because it's going to help. It helps with, I'm sure, with your investigations as well as your deconstruction and putting everything back together,
Yeah, and I think that, a video game, creates these sort of digital barriers, right? There are these sort of these lines that you have to operate with inside. And once you realize that in many cases, and I, not to get crazy philosophical here, I think the world is very much the same way. There are these boundaries that are put in front of us, and the world or applications or security controls tell us that we operate inside of them. And I'm fascinated by the fact that those, in many cases, are just illusions of our environment, and that through depth and understanding and maybe a little divergent thinking, you're able to manipulate these processes or systems to do something in which they were not otherwise intended to do. And that is something that I've just been hooked on for the past 10, 15 years of my life, figuring out the way that these systems work together and how we can manipulate them, or how criminals are manipulating them to better secure our platforms and protect our customers.
Yeah. And then using the system of the criminals to manipulate them, so.
Absolutely.
I love how everybody's origin story is always a video game they couldn't get past, or some school program that you didn't want to really do, or something like that. First job you couldn't log in, so you bypass the thing, and everybody's got that origin story.
Dude, yeah, I had a similar origin story when I really got hooked in. We had this, air quotes, computer science professor guy, or computer science teacher at school. And he was just like, we all had just gotten Windows 95 machines. And so the only thing that was a password was like the screensaver, And so me and my friends, we just put in like some, background, screensavers that were just fire, And we thought that was so cool. And we put a password on it. So like in the middle of class, it would pop up and then he'd feel stupid, We thought that'd be really funny. Well, he got really mad about it. And then put CMOS passwords on all the, 4 or 5 machines. So we were like, man, like the teachers know it, where the teachers keep this. And then somebody read a 2600 article and, okay, it's going to be a combination of, somebody's name and a birth date and, some theme. So we banged away at it for like 3 or 4 months and nothing. And then one of the guys, Eric, he was like, yeah, let's just switch the keyboards and turn the monitor off on the keyboard that's connected to stuff, and have a teacher come over and put the password in. We'll just have the direction go somewhere else. So he did that. It worked. We went to everyone in high school, gave everybody the password. Everybody in the password had the password.
You got to have cover.
Like the half year. Yeah. And we told everybody, like, look, don't tell, like, if you have to, you still need to go ask for the password, but don't tell anybody we've got it. So this went on half the year until finally the very last class of the year. Windows 95 locks up, it reboots, and I'm sitting there, the teacher's there, and my friend Brian is like, dude, put the password in. He's watching us. And I was like, all right, I'm going to put the password in. So I put the password in. Teacher goes bonkers. He's like, "Why? How'd you have this?" He got all mad. And then, basically none of the other teachers took this guy serious. And he's like, "I'm sending you to the principal's office." So I go to the principal's office, and the principal was just like, "Yeah, so you guys had the password and you acted responsibly the whole year, didn't you?" And I was like, "Yes, sir, we did." He's like, "Cool, man. Have a great summer."
It's all about perspective, man.
Yeah. It was, we just
Yeah.
didn't want the man to have us down,
Exactly.
Yeah, I talked to a former CISO of was at the Naval Research Center over here in TC, and he'd gotten his security start that way. He was originally hired by them to be an analyst, and back in the day they were using old Spark systems, and he simply did he said like you had to wait like a week for the network guys to come around and hook you up. So he's just sitting there being bored, and he was like, hell with this. Just physical bypass sets it up so when they show up, he's already on the system and everything. And they were like, we need you to come with us. And that's how he got his start in computer security.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it.
And it was, like you said, it was like a paperclip bypass. One was poke the hole and it resets and you get in.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. I remember being in high school, them locking down command prompts because we thought it would be really funny to like net send people, especially during tests or whatever, right? People would be net sending back and forth and sharing answers and stuff like that. And so I remember they had locked down the command prompt, and when you would launch it, it would be like, right, like this has been locked down by your systems administrator, like you can't use it. And we're like, oh God, what do we do? So I went home and was poking around and looking at some different things, and I figured out that you could write this stuff in a notepad file and save it as a .bat, and then just do the same thing. Right. And so it's like there are these illusions of security that exist around us, and how can we manipulate them? How can others manipulate them? It may be in the beginning, right? It's being nefarious, middle-aged teenagers, whatever it might be. But, these skills really translate into real life situations as you get older, and you see that, there's criminals out here that are doing this stuff. But for financial gain or whatever it is. But those mindsets and that approach and lateral thinking is really what needs to be cultivated. Those are the things that it's very difficult to teach somebody, right? You have to be a self-starter. You have to be self-motivated and so passionate about this stuff to create and curate that. And that is something that I think is lacking as far as, people that want to get into industry. They want to get into InfoSec because they want to make that paycheck, right? But they don't have the same passion, that same drive as a lot of, as a lot of us.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's definitely there's a great divide between, I would say, responsible rebellion and kind of living in who you are versus the InfoSec zealot guy who just wants to be right and just wants to burn scorched earth everywhere and, get whatever the product of the day is and then, have a badge, It's sad, but there's a lot more of that. I mean, we were talking today, even in our daily meeting, about questioning whether we should even sponsor ISSA, just because like we can't even say anything without them being like, oh, that's marketing. We're like, we're not even marketing. We're just here. Right. And it's kind of weird because that zealotry kind of gets pushed everywhere into an unhealthy space versus that, hey, let's learn how to be responsible, rebellious type thinking in this scenario, because across the board, assumptions are the thing that they're the mother of all mess ups. Why don't we have it institutionalized of let's just question the assumptions, call it red teaming, whatever we want to call it, but it's that in the end, right?
Yeah.
But and we were just in Tokyo training a bunch of Japanese CISOs, and that was actually one of the things on the checklist that we kept running them through in this big tabletop exercise we're running is, what are the assumptions you made? And at this point in this scenario, is that still correct? Are you or did we foul up back here somewhere, made some assumptions about what was going on that don't even make any sense based on the new info we have?
Yeah. And that's a really hard thing for that culture too, right? I mean,
oh yeah, no, it's super hard.
And multiple points of validation. I can't tell you how many times I'm doing an investigation. I've got some data, and it looks good, but I don't believe any data that's out there on the internet, much less the internal data that I leverage at my organization. And so it's really a continuous, right, sort of rethinking and restructuring of the assumptions that you're making. And, just as you said, Dan, like, where does the data point to? And
Yeah.
how believable is it? And, I'm always looking out for those people that are doing this sort of counter intel. If I follow that breadcrumb, where does that lead me, and what exposures do I have? And, that goes into operational security concerns and a whole bunch of other things. But yeah, I think that's, again, something that's very difficult to teach. And it has to come from, previous experiences and stuff.
Yeah, I think that discipline in investigations of just keeping your mouth shut for the first 5 to 10 days, right? Like, that's your first lesson. And then it's like, man, like, even if we had the best dossier in the world, it's got to be like, well, maybe we're 60% successful. And then, what are all the artifacts that like correlate each fact? I mean, and man, I still make that same mistake where I want to go fast on something and I'm like, wait a minute. I just pivoted through a bunch of stuff. Is point A and B, are those things correlated by any other data points? Like, and when I tell the story, telling the story to like your wife or somebody who's not technical, they always have a bunch of questions, and you're just like, oh yeah, I was a dumbass.
I think that, that's another great point about, pivoting through some of this stuff super quick. I think especially at a large organization, I don't know if you guys have the same sort of experience, but sometimes stuff is going so quickly, right? There's so many different incidents. Once one, drops off, another one pops up, and it's constant. And, everybody wants an answer today or yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sometimes makes it so that you don't have as much time to be able to validate your data points, to be as thorough, to have as much depth. And so in some cases that, right, can jeopardize your investigation. So I think that's also something that's really important for the investigators that are out there, for, people that have a team of investigators. You need to give them enough time to be able to curate their data, to be able to understand it, so that they have this story that they can come back and explain, and also provide evidence as to why they've, come to those conclusions. And if you've constantly got them jumping from one thing to the next, they're doing these context switches from digital investigations to physical, physical protection related stuff, or whatever it might be, these context switches sometimes don't allow your investigators to have as much depth in their investigations.
Dan and I were just discussing this about an IR related client where they wanted to have status update phone calls every 4 hours, and we had to tell them, like, look, you're not leaving enough window in there for anybody to move the ball forward. And
Right.
then they were having the same problem where they wanted to jump from one target to the next target to the next target. And it's like, we really need to just work our way down the list methodically and work our way through things, because that's what's going to get us to the goal we want at the end. But that's a difficult mindset for people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about it just a little differently the last year. Is just those CISOs are the people that you need to be pushing that information up to. Like, we are not the heroes in that story, even though we feel like it, and we're kind of put in that position. We're just the guides to help them manage the risk and make those decisions. And that sometimes, I think it's easy to just jump over the line and be like, yeah, I'm going to be the hero for you today. And here's this APT group, and it's super crazy China, and you're totally owned. And I feel good for telling you that because I saw it, and it's like, all right, so how do we fit it into, maybe that guy needs to tell that story to the board. He needs to tell it to the lawyers. Like, let's isolate it down. Let's give them a something that can be manageable over the short term and the long term. And it has nothing to do with all the obscure details. It's just, here's your high level, like, I want to be a guide. Your ego kind of dies a little more, but on the technical side, right?
Yeah, and for me, it's about being a storyteller, right? I take these investigations, or I take these incidents, and I create and I have a story that comes out of them through the data points that I'm collecting. And so I think that for me, when I go and present to my CISO or whoever else it might be within the organization, it's about, hey, right, this is the incident. here are the data points that we collected, and here's what we found. And it's really that step by step, it's a storytelling process. And I think that's something else that's really important. You have to have really great writing skills, and you have to be able to be a storyteller to describe what is happening, and in layman's terms, right? You can be the most technical person in the room, and in many cases, that's not going to get you in the front of the right people to be able to tell these stories. And if you can't get up and articulate what's going on in a calm, concise manner, because I mean, think about it. Some of these guys, the amount of money that they're making, 5, 10, 20 minutes in a room with you, you're talking quite a bit of money. So, you're given a very short window of time to talk, and you better, get it done pretty quickly.
Right. And I guess I want to just encourage some of the younger guys too, that like, this is a progression. You're going to come to these conclusions. You're going to have these experiences, and messing up is okay on, telling the story the wrong way or getting too technical. Because it happens. It's happened to all of us a million times. Yeah. But like what you're saying, that new discipline of storytelling, I think that, we were talking to Matt DeVoe. Yeah. Matt DeVoe last week, and Zach Payton the week before. And, Zach,
they've got story mode built into their Westward AI program. It's literally called story mode.
Right. Like, and I mean, I've been doing a lot of research on some stuff. I don't want to I can't say like what it's with, but it is along those lines of like stories and whatnot. Just it's so powerful, the story and isolating down the facts that somebody needs to know, because we just have to be aware that like they're only going to take away 2 or 3 facts. Like if we get past 2 or 3 facts, it's just like, going to, church or something. Does the preacher ever have anything more than 3 bullet points? No, he doesn't.
And being able to understand your audience as well, right? Understand your audience, understand the content that you're delivering. But I think also, going back, Dan, to what you were saying about like, we've all gotten it wrong. Man, it's embarrassing to get certain facts wrong. It's embarrassing to be able to deliver, that information and be very confident and be wrong. But something my father always taught me was, integrity is about, doing the right thing when nobody's watching. But it's integrity is about how you act, not when things are going good, but when things are going bad, and how you handle yourself. And one of the most critical things that I think in this industry is having a positive reputation, a reputation of integrity. When you come across a fact, or you create this, particular part of the story, and it might be mischaracterized or whatever, and you realize that has been done, then you need to come clean, and you need to be open and honest. And instead of being embarrassed by that, use that as an opportunity to humble yourself and to realize that, hey, right, like this is a part of the game, and don't feel bad about it, but make sure that you address it, that you move on. You don't, let it get you down, because we've all been there, and it's interesting sometimes.
Yeah, well, Blake, I mean, I think that was one of the first things when I met you. I was like, man, this is awesome, because that integrity came across in questions and, in dialogue across the board, where, we didn't have to agree on everything, but, it just created this atmosphere of more, conversation, more dialogue, and really that deeper relationship, which is sometimes harder when the guy is just like, oh, it's just going to be drive-by truth hour. See ya,
Right.
I had a instance where working with the Velexity guys, Michael Lay, and we were reviewing some RAM, and he'd actually pointed out to me maybe 6-7 days earlier, like, oh, you should probably take a look at this thing. And we were hunting down some fileless malware stuff, and it took me 6 days to get back around to look at that and go, oh, he tagged that for me. It was right there the whole time, just like in my face on the screen the whole time as I ran all over the place, and just didn't follow the breadcrumb.
Yeah,
you hate it, but it happens, right? You're looking.
It could have been worse. You could be 1.5 years into an investigation.
Yeah.
Like, that's happened before. You're like, whoa, wow.
What's this cupcake recipe thing?
I'm going to shift here just a little bit. One of the cool things I liked about some of the work that you've done, Blake, is the Intel CTF. Can you share kind of like what were the roots in that? What got you into that gamification of things, like you and Kev, and like the whole deal?
Yeah. So Intelligence CTF is basically a narrative-based scenario where we take data points and we seed them across the internet. And right, these could be domain registrations, monikers on specific forums or websites or whatever it might be, seeding of phone numbers, or just really whatever data points are relevant to the narrative that we're describing. And so a lot of that was baked in. I created that in 2015, and that was our first DEF CON event that we did. So we went down to DEF CON and ran it and had a number of people play, and it was a really great time. But that all was born out of, this like passion for open source intelligence. And I think what I found is in many cases, I've got internal data sets that I can leverage for various, parts of my investigation. But what I found is that there was probably 80 to 90% coverage on the same data that was externally available. And so I really wanted to create these games for people where we could craft a narrative around an incident that happened. If it's a website breach, if it was, a company that was broken into, if it was whatever, and really teach people how to pivot off of certain data points, what resources out there could help them, push them through their investigative process to connect that next data point, and show people how, like, hey, this is, when I was in college, a couple of my classes were like applied exploits in hacking and, like reverse engineering and all this other stuff. And I never knew that there was like these open source intelligence digital investigators that were out there doing like all this different stuff, and I don't even know of a curriculum right now at school where they're teaching like open source intelligence specifically. And so really seeing that there was a need in the space to teach people about open source intelligence techniques. And yeah, there's a lot of great blog posts, there's a lot of great stuff out there and resources, but basically creating a game to put people into a scenario where they can apply some skills that they've learned, but also, like, I don't know about you guys, I know, you probably have played CTFs before, like capture the flag events. I've played a whole bunch, hundreds and hundreds over the years that I've been around. And in many cases, they're Jeopardy style, and man, you get to that reverse engineering, whatever, you need to set, whatever specific parameter up in this thing, and you don't know how to do it, it's game over for you. There's no educational process baked in. And so what Kevin and I have done, and our colleague Alex as well, is we've created this process where as you're going through this narrative sort of experience, if you get stuck up on something for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, there's this sort of seamless integrative process that helps educate you, to teach you, to put you down the right track, because we want to educate people. It's not just about doing that CTF to see how much do you know. It's, well, what do you not know? And how can we further, develop your skill set to make you a better investigator? So I think that's where a lot of it was birthed from.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, the success on that's been awesome over the years. I know that there's another OSINT type CTF thing at DEF CON as well, but this is entirely different for those that haven't done it. This is a great thing. Like I've run everybody on our team through it, and it's been really good. We're going to try to push the same kind of style out through ShadowDragon. We've already pushed some stuff out, and just waiting for a little bit more traction on that. But so far, everybody who's done it so far has really loved it and enjoyed that. I think you did a great job on that,
Oh, thanks. And I think the other really cool thing is not only does it do digital, do we do digital investigative narratives, but I think also the physical components. So, right, this past year we did an event at DEF CON this previous year, and we basically did it to where there was 10 or 12 digital flags, where you're investigating this person, you've got a moniker, you find a Twitter account, you find a domain, you find some PGP keys, you find some whatever else. But then it goes from doing this sort of digital investigation to realizing, hey, your target is actually physically at DEF CON. and, you know, here's where they're located. We have the back of what their shirt looks like. And so now you need to go and tell your target, right? And now you need to go and collect something, you know, from a specific part of the hotel, or you have to, you know, stand by that payphone and be aware enough to pick it up if it rings, right? And it's really about trying to get people in the mindset of, are you paying attention to your environment? Because there's a lot more going on around you than you might think is going on. And so creating opportunities for people to, again, develop, curate that divergent thinking so that they can bring that back when they're doing their investigations. I think that is something that nobody else is doing, and that we do an extremely good job at.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I liked the parallelism of what you guys were doing and then what we were doing, kind of like philosophically trying to push some of the I guess the investigative teams that kind of like are the tip of the spear, that need to kind of keep integrating the investigative side and that physical side, those two shared domains of, you know, getting up out of your seat and engaging. You know, like we've been pushing that a little bit with some of our customers, and I think that's the next horizon of just, you know, if things happen and the EU, you know, crumbles, you know, you're going to have a lot of these states that just don't have a shared force, you know, amongst the EU, and there's going to be a lot of small teams that are going to be operating independently, and they're going to have to be balancing those two worlds, you know, the physical world and the cyber world, and get a little bit better on the joining of those things, you know.
Can I come back around to something else you mentioned, Blake, which is, and Dan, you and I have talked about this a lot of times, but it actually came up with one of my investigators this week, the education they're receiving at various colleges and universities related to cybersecurity in the past 5-10 years is just not answering the business needs and the daily grind of this job out sort of needs that people have. And one of my investigators brought this up this weekend, that, you know, he's got a master's in cybersecurity from a good university, and he's like, I don't feel like this prepared me for anything. It's like, but I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think that the curriculum and programs need to catch up to where the industry is at. And the problem is that many people who are teaching cybersecurity at these universities are doing so right out of college, or doing so, you know, maybe with a couple years of experience at a small organization, and they don't go spend, you know, 15, 20 years or whatever it might be. And sure, you do have some people that have done this. I think Russ Rogers, as far as, you know, one of my teachers, Russ Rogers worked at the University of Technology, super baked into Black Hat and the DEF CON scene, and is really well known. You know, I think that the content that is being used is to satisfy sort of like an educational requirement. And it's not teaching people the skills that they necessarily need to be successful in the industry. And don't get me wrong, you know, don't blanket this over everything, but everybody that goes to college that's in like InfoSec, they all want to be pen testers. They all want to be a red team. They all want to be doing all this crazy stuff. And in many cases, like, that's not what a lot of these organizations need.
I keep saying that everybody, you know, everybody focuses on the red, but all the jobs and all the requirements are on the blue side.
Absolutely. And there's a time and a place for both, right? So I'm fortunate enough to be in the position at the organization where I do get to be a part of some red team initiatives and provide some expertise or, you know, approaches in certain scenarios, whatever it might be. But I think that there's a whole bunch of skills that are not being taught that need to be related to just bringing the use cases back to business need. Because I can find something super cool. I can be doing all this reverse engineering and all these ROP gadgets and vtable overrides and all this different stuff. But at the end of the day, like, when you go into an organization, you're doing a pen test, you know, for a financial institution or whatever it is, in many cases, you're not going to be writing stuff like that on your own, off to the side. You're going to be using off-the-shelf stuff. You're going to be looking for misconfigurations. You're going to be looking for ways to leverage something, you know, some trust relationship that was not otherwise, solidified or that somebody knew about. And it's those sort of subtle manipulations and less on, well, I'm going to hack the planet, bro. Right. And so I think that the mindset needs to shift a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some grandiose there in that just desire for the pen test stuff. I mean, I grew up in, the Unix world and then networking and, I was pushing towards the pen testing stuff early on, but it wasn't even a paid gig yet, and, luckily when the industry got to it, the timing was perfect, but, I don't think I've ever, when doing pen test, I probably used a 0-day maybe 2 or 3 times, or even an exploit for that matter. Like most of the time it's just, read, write, execute. I need to get that and get those puzzle pieces together in some weird
Or
trust relationship.
The feature, Dan. That's not a bug, man. That's a feature. They added.
Yeah. And and two, I always enjoyed, like, I took a lot of time, and this is where the bridge over to, investigations and OSINT really was a bridge for me, was just like mapping out the ego. I always wanted to I always mapped out the ego, because then I could anticipate that how much, that sysadmin, like his style and demeanor and where he was going to make the next, call, where he's going to post things, or what the next host might look like, or, common things he might do. And that was just because I had this huge background in doing enterprise, Unix support and sysadmin, adminning and all that. And the red teaming was just overlaid over that versus, it was overlaid over all this other knowledge. So I kind of wrapping this back up to like academia and their role, I do think that there's a bigger shift that needs to happen in how academic programs are structured, like that current academic structure in, high level education and in lower level education. I don't think it really works, like I kind of think that the classical education is better. But that's a whole nother topic. But I think that there's still room in the industry and time for those type of things to start changing. I'm not the guy for that,
And I think a lot of the technical skills have over the years, through the immense amount of tooling and stuff that's out there, the technical requirements have sort of, and the understanding has been abstracted, right? It's like I've got my tool over here and it does X, but it broke today, or my upgrade didn't happen, or whatever it might be. And crap, I don't know like how this actually works under the covers. And Kevin has been an instrumental part of my life on teaching me about like, let's get at the root of this. Let's get down to the super fundamentals, like on the wire, like how does this all connect together? Because if that tooling that you use goes away, can you rewrite it, right? Can you do it on your own? Do you have that foundational understanding to allow you to continue your approach and your process? And I feel like in many cases, universities are teaching people how to use, Metasploit, for example, or Nmap.
I was just thinking that it's the Metasploit calification of the whole industry.
Yeah, and like if before pattern offset, right, for writing exploits, like binary tree analysis, like what were people doing before pattern offset came around? Like you had to, systematically break your stuff down and do it by hand. And so I think that that's another critical thing that is further being abstracted from students today, and that needs to be sort of revisited.
Well, that and going through whole programs with just no programming background.
Yeah,
right?
that's a
how
weird
does that happen? How do you, if you don't know how any of this stuff works, how are you supposed to know what to do when it breaks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, so kind of, I want to shift the topic over to the topic at hand, which is hackback or long-term investigations. Blake, what are your thoughts, experiences on any of those things? Tag, you're it.
Cool, yeah. So I know that, for a while people have been talking about hacking back, or, ways to do more interesting things in the space when it's necessary, or when you're chartered to do so. Um, I think it really, so for me, in my personal experience at the organization that I work at, clearly hacking back for a financial institution is not within our charter, not something that we are privy to do, and has serious legal implications. But with that, I believe and have come up with this idea that instead of hacking back, what about active defense technologies? And what I mean by active defense is, let's take a credential stuffing attack, for example. Blocking IPs doesn't work. It works to a degree, but depending on your rate limiting policies and a number of other components to your security architecture, those might go out the window. And so from an active defense perspective, let's say there's a bit of crimeware out there that is leveraging a super old version of a particular browser, or whatever it is, let's say. Well, what happens if I load a bit of JavaScript into that browser, and unfortunately, that browser is just super out of date, and man, it can't handle the way this JavaScript is calling, itself, or whatever it might be, and maybe that creates max CPU utilization on the endpoint. Now, any other user, right, in the environment, or any other user that might be interacting with the platform, if they're running an up-to-date version, within the past 15 or 20 versions, the JavaScript that's loaded into the browser is not going to do anything to them. It will be just like any normal JavaScript. It won't create any more overhead. But bits of crimeware that's out there specifically use typically older bits of software. And so with that, I don't know, what if we were just to happen to arbitrarily load this into every single user session? And it's not my fault if your browser can't handle it, right? And so I think being a little bit more creative in that way is something that the industry needs to do. And I think that that's something that our organization in particular is interested in pursuing a little bit more. We've got some research initiatives around this. But as far as hacking back, if you're a part of a team that is chartered to do so, and you have the legal authority to do so, then I think that is definitely a tool within your toolbox that should be utilized, especially in high risk scenarios that require quick turnaround or require visibility that would otherwise not be you would not be able to get. And so I'm of the opinion that it is something that needs to be used sparingly, that needs to have multiple points of vetting and validation and support from whoever is authorizing this activity. I think that in many cases the concern about hacking back is that, well, if you do it in this scenario, then what's the threshold to allow that sort of activity? And I think that that is the discussion that needs to be had, more than sort of, oh, well, is hacking back right or wrong? Right? Well, it depends. And I think that in many cases, a lot of people are very concerned that if you do allow that sort of capability to happen, are the right checks and balances in place to ensure that it's not being abused?
Yeah, no, I think those are good words. Brian, what are some of your thoughts on this? Because this even came up last week with a client.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I thought this was a done and over thing, and then I was up at the Columbia University was it Law and Cyber Warfare Conference, and they had a panel of military attorneys on, and they had brought up that this Representative Tom Graves from Georgia had introduced this bill again, and basically they were blasting it, going, this is a terrible idea. There's government military organizations that have the mandate and the charter for this. It's done under controlled, supervised programs. If we just have everybody that thinks they've identified the bad guy doing this, we're just going to have utter chaos. Which is where I tend to be with that too. Is unfortunately, I guess, for the nature of what we do, at the company, is I see a lot of organizations that, I would not, under any circumstances, want to see them hacking back at anybody, because they don't they don't have a great understanding of their own network. They certainly don't have understanding what's going on in other people's, and attribution and things like that. Just not something they're capable of doing. And if you put a loaded gun in their hands, who knows where they're pointing that thing at.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
and
would.
what's the next step too, right? Like what's the next step? Okay, so you hack back. Let's say you're confident that that's your target that carried out whatever activity, and you pop something that's related to them. Then what? What's the intention of hacking back? What are you going to do? You're
Right.
going to spy on them
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
while? What data are you going to? Now you have to exfiltrate data. Now there's a lot of touch points related to your engagement with this target. That could come back. And again, if this is not in your charter and you're not authorized to do that, then there are serious legal implications. So I am totally, of the opinion that unless you are, working in those positions, that you are allowed to do this. If you are not, then you should stay very far away of even considering that sort of activity.
yeah. I tend to agree, and I think the sentiment of the hackback is probably more rooted in the fact that like law enforcement is failing in providing the law enforcement needs to those that have been compromised. So I mean, I know over
But so
the
you got
years.
that data, Dave, right?
Say
You got
what?
that data. Like you've got that data now. You hacked back. You got that data. What you gonna give that to LE as part of their discovery? Like, no, totally. I went and like popped them here, and I used this here, and I exfiltrated this. Like, oh, okay. So now you're gonna get your whole case thrown out anyways. Like you can't even do that. So then what's your
Yeah,
what?
yeah.
Because it becomes vigilantism, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I can't.
Right,
Just,
but okay, so let's throw
Yeah.
devil's advocate in here. Like where does castle doctrine start on individuals or small LLCs and C corps and all that? Like where does that fall into in the digital space? Like you had a huge you had many different occurrences over the last 20 years of this kind of stuff happening, and like Sony was a good example. Like you had state-sponsored dudes pissed off about something in a movie, and they obliviate a U.S. corporation. Now, luckily, that U.S. corporation didn't hack back, but it did seem like there was a military response.
Yeah, I would say you can't really draw a parallel between castle doctrine law and hacking back on cyber attack. And here's my reasoning why is if somebody's pointing a gun at me, I don't, pretty much anybody can determine that who's at the other end of the gun, right?
Right.
And they know that it's an obvious threat to them, and somebody walking by would also be like, oh my God, that's an obvious threat, and I can see who's pointing the gun. You just don't have that in that cyber realm, right? That's the problem is, and you've probably had this. I've had customers that are kind of unaware, going, oh, well, Microsoft is hacking us. I'm like, I really don't. Amazon is hacking us. It's like, no. There's somebody's got an instance and it's being used against you, and calm down. But you've heard that, right? You've heard that come out of people's mouths.
Yeah.
And that's my fear.
Yeah. I've also seen people be like, hey, I've got their IP address and I geolocated it to this street address, and well, there they are. And I'm like, oh my God, there's a fundamental misunderstanding about how any of this stuff works.
Sure.
And I think it's very difficult also, to support, to support that. I think that it's very difficult to equate the, castle doctrine sort of example to this scenario. And while, somebody is in your environment, in many cases, you want to maintain visibility.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You want to maintain visibility to get a better understanding of your target, what they're doing, what their intentions are, what their capabilities are. And so in those cases, like play with them. If they're inside of your environment, like set up some stuff and point them to that direction, and create hell for them. Create as much tar.
The tar pits and honey boxes are awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But as far as hacking back or anything like that, again, for most organizations, for the 99% that are out there, I think I would highly advise not doing anything in that sort of capacity.
Well, and I guess like what I'm trying to say is I feel like when people say it should be hacked back, they're really saying I feel like law enforcement isn't working for me. I feel like I don't know really where to turn to. And I'm also confusing hackback and long-term investigation for some type of attribution that may have other strategic bullet points that you could follow up on, you know? So
And I could totally agree with you there. What
those
they
are
really want is they want to know who's doing this to me.
right. They want to know, how can we change our business? Like what does this really mean for us long term? And, you know, how can we get a little bit more visibility than mysterious ransomware bad guys, right? Like, even though they're saying we want to hack back and blow them up, it's like, okay, you're a business. Let's be sober about this. You're angry. All right. You're going to be in denial here pretty soon and grieving about the cost of the incident. There's other things that are going to happen. But anyway, that's kind of where I kind of feel like this is what they're really saying, even though they're saying this other thing, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree.
But can you share with some of the folks some of your successes in long-term investigations and having strategic outcomes for things, maybe, you know, for what you guys are doing, or any place that you've observed over the years, even working, if you guys have worked with law enforcement or not?
Yeah. So you just specifically about the organization that I work at and some like investigations that I've been a part of and how that sort of helped the organization is.
Well, like, I mean, I'm just trying to contrast hackback versus long-term investigations, and maybe taking action, like not action against the actor where, you know, you get them arrested, but like you get enough things built up and handed over, which may actually change things in a larger picture sense versus a hackback, you know? Like,
Right.
have you seen taking out a few actors reduce fraud because you disrupted an ecosystem of toolage or capability within the you know, the crimeware market place and stuff like
Yeah.
that, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. And I think that, you know, in many cases, right, like your security operations center is not going to be doing these long-term investigations, right? The security operations center is there to squash fires, to put them out, to drive the incidents forward, to engage the right, you know, teammates and partners within the organization to remediate whatever incident occurred. Your more tactical teams, like, you know, the teams that I'm a part of, might take a little bit more time in looking at, you know, who carried out that DDoS attack, or hey, that big credential stuffing attack, like what does that go back to? And in those sort of tactical scenarios, being able to collect as much information about the incident as possible. But really, you know, you're going to get this grip of noise that happens during your incident. And it's really trying to get back to that very beginning spot of right when it began. What was the incident or the thing that they messed up right there at the beginning that put you onto their trail? And you know, in the case of credential stuffing, because I think, you know, it's an industry-wide problem. You know, in many cases, you go and look at these criminal toolkits that are out there to automate, you know, sort of the smashing of credentials against endpoints, against various platforms. A lot of these guys that are doing this stuff, they made one request, they copied that request, they randomized certain features and values. And if you go back to when that, you know, that first signature of that request emerged, you might find a test account, right? Or you might even find their personal account, or you might find attributes about the device that carried out that request that could be, you know, instrumental in you being able to pivot off and identify, you know, whatever it is that you're looking for. And that's where, you know, in some of these cases, you get an email address, you get a MAC address, you get a phone number, you get whatever. That's where you need tooling that allows you to have a consistent monitoring platform. And then, you know, the tooling that your organization provides is critical in being able to do exactly that, is to get visibility into data points that are interesting to you, especially over a long period of time. And the collection of these data points, and I think also, you know, industry collaboration is huge. I know we all have things that are TLP red or TLP rainbow sprinkles or whatever you want to call it that you don't want to talk to anybody about. But there is definitely a necessity to leverage industry partners to be able to drive some of these investigations forward. And then figuring out a way that, you can back your way into some of that data or leverage that data and then work with LE to maybe it's attribution, right? Or maybe it's to figure out what that endpoint, what's on that endpoint to get a better understanding of where your adversary is coming from or whatever it might be. So there's definitely been investigations that we've run, long-term investigations that have been, 2.5 years where, trying to identify the targets related to money laundering or whatever it might be, that through our investigative process that, again, have taken years in some cases, and the attribution, and these people being extradited has significantly impacted sort of the fraud scene or fraud as a service in some cases against various financial organizations.
Wow. Can you share any quantification of like how much that fraud impact was after disruption?
So in some cases, it's been the complete, eradication of some of these money laundering services, right, that are out there. I think something else that's important to keep in mind is that, not a lot of people think about the operational costs around incidents. And what I mean by that is like, let's say hypothetically, there's an adversary who is really into, again, let's use the credential stuffing example, really into credential stuffing and has been taking credentials from across the internet from all these different leaks and smashing them against your organization. And maybe they've introduced these illicit requests organically, right, into the environment. Well, over time, depending on how many of those requests are illegitimate, your operations teams have to have the capacity to be able to support the login events related to those endpoints. And so in some cases, and I'm not going to go into, too deep detail, but, in some cases, the attribution of the individuals behind some of these very large services that are out there we've seen drastic reduction in the abuse against certain endpoints. And that also reduces the operational cost that is required to run those endpoints, because the organization might say, hey, there's just a lot more people logging in, or there just might be, just a little bit more traffic because it's the end of the year, right? It's around December and there's a lot of people, on the Steam sale or whatever. And criminals know that this is a great opportunity to introduce illicit traffic into the platform. But bringing it back, the operational costs, attribution is cool and sexy and all that stuff, but there's even a monetary amount that, hey, your app pools needed 50% capacity because you just took out that, that adversary that was creating, that sort of crimeware as a service that was supporting the rest of the industry. So I think that that's something that not a lot of people think about, and that's important to mention.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, you have a good amount of data on the fact that like being strategic in your investigations outside of just the incident is much more advantageous to the operational costs of the organization, the cost of cutting out different, criminal networks that like lowers things. And that's not hackback, but it kind of sounds like it if I'm not super technical, like, what did your mom just hear? Like, oh, you just hacked them back and you got them arrested. And it's like, well, or you just did an awesome investigation,
Yeah, no, there are certain touch points, and data exposures that can be leveraged that provide you sort of the same visibility. I mean, maybe in some of these cases, and again, if it's in your charter, maybe actor engagement is important. Maybe you develop a 3-month, 6-month relationship with this target or that group or whatever it might be, and you start playing the game, right? Is that hacking back? No, I'm just having a conversation with somebody, right?
Right.
But what sort of visibility does that conversation give you? And then maybe the data that was collected or whatever it is that you might maybe interested in, all these guys, and Dan, you know this better than I, all these guys love to brag and they love to show everybody how cool they are and the coolest thing that they just did. And in many cases, you might be able to get the same information by just maybe a little bit of human intelligence.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've been pushing that kind of dialogue thing for many years, and it's been, I always thought it would be like kind of successful, and then when you're doing it, it's really successful. You know, like people join nowadays over just shared topics, and then you just keep pinging them over a certain course of time. And I mean, typically what I've seen is like you get like 90% success or more if you're just patient on that gameplay, you know, and then, you know, push them something that's going to reveal something about either fingerprinting their device or getting more geographical location on them. It really helps, you know, like, and it helps in weird places where it's not just, you know, the cyber domain, it's kind of the physical domain as well, you know. So
and chatting with people and sending somebody an email and social engineering them, none of that is illegal. None of that is off the table. None of that is, you know, and it could very much be high risk. And I'm not a lawyer, so go talk with your own, you know, sort of legal department or whatever. But in many cases, right, it might be high risk, but it's definitely not anything that is like a hackback as far as, you know, legality is concerned. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of capabilities that people could utilize that they maybe aren't comfortable with. And that's why having a mature team and
right.
Yeah, individuals that can help support sort of these notions and leveraging them when high risk situations go down.
Yeah. Can you share anything if you guys have had any, you know, high risk situations with violence or anything like that? Because that's, you know, we've seen that kind of be the theme over the last 9 to 12 months with the merging of corporate security teams and the cyber, you know, kind of the deeper investigative teams kind of merging together because they've got risks online and physical things. Like, have you experienced anything of success or anything in that realm?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, I mentioned OI Monitor previously with being instrumental in being able to gain visibility and consistent visibility into, you know, a target that you might be tracking, right? But in regard to physical, you know, acts of violence, you know, again, the capability that your organization provides, Dan, Spotter, right, is a great tool. And has been used, you know, to help facilitate, you know, identification of, you know, adversaries, in particular physical security scenarios. And right, the corporate security team, I mean, these guys are the guys that are, you know, have a team of physical people that are standing at the front door, right? That might have a firearm or might not, that are watching the cameras and all that stuff. These are not cyber intel, you know, go and hunt down your target sort of people. I mean, they might be able to use LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter like anybody else, but they don't have the same sort of capability or mindset or even approach to how you might get some of this stuff done. So
Right.
there have definitely been incidents that have happened at the organization where, you know, adversarial engagement was critical, especially when it came to physical acts of violence. It was critical in being able to, I believe in many cases, save people's lives. And I think the tooling and stuff that your organization provides allows you to do that.
Well, yeah, thank you. I wasn't trying to get our tools plugged there. But I mean, what are some of the things for some of the analysts out there that, like, when you're going through that investigation, when it's really stressful, you know, there's that physical threat side of things. What were some of the things that you did just as a methodical process that just from within your workflow that helped you stay focused, stayed on target, and didn't get, you know, lost in the weeds when you've got a time crunch on, you know, threats coming in online that need to be countered, and, you know, some level of information shared with execs and corporate security teams? Like, what was your mindset? What was your experience in that? And kind of what were some gems that you could give to some of the other investigators out there that you learned from that process?
So you need to have a very specific end goal, right? During your physical incidents, you know, it's probably a target, right? That's making posts or sending emails or doing whatever it might be. And I think making sure that you have a very clear end game of what you are looking to accomplish, what sort of visibility that you're looking to acquire. And then, so without getting too crazy into the details, I think establishing your persona and the backstory of your persona is important. Writing all of this down and having sort of your narrative written out so that you can stick to the script. And that might be around what time you log in and log off, right? That might be the type of verbiage that you use. Maybe, that might be the things that you're interested in, and ensuring that you're cataloging this information. So, right, you should be cataloging your target's information, your adversary's information, but you should also be cataloging your persona's information that you are using. And as you're doing your engagements, right, you, of course, need to leverage things that maybe your persona and your target are mutually interested in. That can be leveraged to provide further visibility into whatever it is that you might be interested in. But I think, you need to have a start and an end date. You need to be able to have an appropriate data collection process, and especially like the time frame. If your normal job, let's say, is from 9 to 5, and that is when you've got to get run of the business sort of stuff done. Maybe your persona is in a different time zone, right? And maybe that gives you the opportunity to, well, yeah, maybe I can work on some of this stuff because it is related to work, obviously, during the day, but we've got other stuff coming through the pipeline. Well, because I've established a time frame that is outside of the normal operating hours I typically work in, this gives me the opportunity, and it frees me up to maybe at nighttime, right, do a little bit more of engagement or whatever it might be. And everybody has to figure out what works for them. But, as far as being able to keep on track and keep a consistent engagement with your adversary, separating sort of hashtag day job and spooky, tactical investigation, that for me has been really helpful in not sort of overlapping the two.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Brian, what are some of your life lessons in that realm? I mean,
geez, some of those. Well, do I get to plug OI Monitor again?
You can.
I feel like I should.
Hey, I was being legit. I wasn't trying to talk.
No, it's
serious.
Yeah, no, like plug it, OI Monitor, Spotter, whatever. I mean, like that's cool.
But I mean, that's a super useful tool, right? You just you plug in your criteria, you refine it a little bit, and boom, real time intel popping up in your face. What's not to love?
There's so many funny stories we could put there.
Yeah, there are. But God, I don't know. I mean, I get all like crazy philosophical about this, and I'm always going to revert to like the timeline. The timeline is everything. You got to know what's happening at each point, and the big picture, because the big picture tells you about the little details and things like that, and still struggle to get people to understand that the most useful tool in every investigation is just a timeline of what the hell you're doing. But loved your comments though there, Blake, on the difficulties in trying to maintain synthetic identities and stuff like that. It's so freaking hard.
It really is. It really is
unbelievable.
Like the people talk about vulnerability equities, and I think they should really be talking about synthetic identity equities, especially from now until 2020, 21. It's like, it looks like the current warfare landscape is in the digital field with synthetic identities. You either have it or you don't have it, and you either know how to backstop it, don't know how to backstop it, and what kind of ammunition to push via memes and avoiding object recognition and that kind of stuff. It's a hard thing.
There's that, and just I think the other difficult part is for those folks that trade and traffic in those identities, providing them to people that don't understand how difficult they are to produce and the need to maintain them. And I mean, it's always the single slip up, right? The one faux pas that wrecks this otherwise beautiful situation. and and we have our own cases that go that way too, right? We had that issue with the test scam guys a few years back, where everybody thought it was a Korean run operation and all that, and it turned out it was a couple of guys out in the Midwest who'd specifically redirected everything to make it look like it was a test stealing, test fraud operation out of Korea, and one individual on that 3-man team fouled up and used an identity for something he shouldn't have, and that was all it took to bring down the whole ring.
Yeah, assumptions.
Yeah, I think synthetic data and synthetic accounts, especially with the interconnectedness of the internet. I mean, there are ways that you can seed data into the internet to establish pretty believable identities, right? A lot of different methods and techniques that I'm sure that we're all aware of. And so again, figuring out ways you have multiple points of validation from multiple sources, and timelining. Brian, I think you pointed that out and hit the nail on the head, right? The timeline of your incident, and it might take a little bit more time to do. And again, if you're working on a team where you've got stuff coming in constantly, sometimes timelining is very difficult. But with these serious high-end investigations that require really, really in-depth understanding, one of the main things that we do is we timeline the incident from start to finish. We figure out, if there are any, correlated events related to the timing, what data points might have, right? Based off of the timeline, we're also able to determine, what the touch points were related to the incident, right? If it was a DDoS attack, okay, well, right, this came in at this time, and okay, well, so what data points do I have related to that, point in time that I could leverage to further, drive my investigative efforts? And so timelining not only helps you break down the incident, but also helps you prioritize and focus on what data points you might be able to leverage, right, during your investigative process.
All that and separating overlapping incidents, because that human nature where two things happen at roughly the same time. Oh, it's all about the same incident.
Yeah.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
There's been some weird coincidences too, man. I'm like,
sure.
No, these are totally correlated, and nope, they're not. It was a coincidence.
Yeah, and you start looking at the timeline, and you're like, that doesn't make any sense if this and here and that and there, and that can't possibly be related. You go, damn it.
Yeah.
There goes my whole theory is shot.
Going back onto the synthetic identities and backstopping, I kind of start geeking out on that a lot more. What I found was there was this really good book by this guy named Jay Dobbins. He was an undercover guy for the ATF, and he talked about how the backstop team that was a part of that, they even went back in time and modified yearbooks because they knew the adversaries that they're going to go after were going to go and do their due diligence all the way to the end, when the guy was a teenager, because that's where the origin story just couldn't be false. And so they just in those backstoppings, they just tried to look at how far back can we go. And I mean, I think that's going to be a much more difficult thing moving forward with everything. But
well, especially because kids nowadays have so much data that they've dumped online in their youth, that if your synthetic person that's supposed to be 23 years old doesn't have 17 years worth of digital tracks, they're not going to be credible.
Right.
Start seeding it now, boys. Start seeding it now.
I know, right? It's the synthetic equities here. Hashtag synthetic equities. We said it here.
But I mean, if you think about that, then what is it going to cost to actually have for those that are in the business of that, if I've spent years building up all these dummy synthetic accounts, what's the cost of those?
Dude, I know some of the accounts that we've got, they're 12 years old.
Right.
That we've just had since forever. And for some reason, just because they're so old, they just never die now, and we keep seeding them, and it's when's that going to die? At some point, it just keeps living, you know?
It's super interesting to think about too. I think synthetic identities moving forward, and right, we have to be careful of the platform in which we are, curating certain bits of data. And again, who are you scared of? Are you scared of the platform in which you're developing this data? Are you scared of, the individual that might come across that data? Figuring out opportunities to maybe operate inside the guidelines that are out there, but at the same time, see the information that makes it look believable. Maybe you did have an account on that platform with that email address. Maybe it got deactivated. You can't tell when it was deactivated, right? But it was deactivated, and so that might provide a little bit of credibility. And I think in many cases there are ways that you can piggyback off of perceived credible information, right?
Yeah.
There's this perception of information that is out there, and based off of just the way people think about it, you can piggyback off of, sort of like the psychological approach that people have to some of that data and it going away or whatever it might be. And in many cases, I think that can provide you what you need to get your job done. But I think moving forward, especially as investigative accounts become more critical, and certain platforms tightening security controls and sort of getting rid of accounts on their platforms that they don't want to be there, it makes it difficult. And so we got to be a little bit more creative on how we go about some of this.
Right. And one of the things I really enjoy about synthetic identities and having groups of them is it helps you like leverage some of the algorithms on each platform to give you more insight into those types of groups of people. Like we put, a good amount of effort into, these synthetic identities are only in, the drug world. These ones are only in the terrorist world. These ones are only in, the human trafficking world, to get those lookalike type, AI algorithms to keep expanding their reach in that particular realm, So I think that there's a lot of, even if you're just capturing stuff in the back end and you're not even engaging, the value of synthetic identities leveraged on top of whatever, let's air quotes AI/MapReduce, whatever outputs the platform is going to give you, it's going to be helpful moving forward as those criminal networks expand and contract. You're kind of already in it, and the algorithms are helping you, So.
Yeah, totally agree.
But, so we're kind of a little over, but as far as the inbox, I didn't really have anything from the inbox this week on questions and answers from any of our inbounds via email. I haven't really asked the Twitter person about that, so I have nothing right now. Blake, we usually have an inbound list of questions people ask. Last week was location, geolocation, and how we're saying crap maps. Are they actually helpful? This week I don't really have anything, so you'll have to join us again for whatever the random question of the week is.
Yeah, sounds good. I really appreciate you guys letting me be a part of this and just chatting. I'd love to come back and be a part of the conversation again. But yeah, I think it's important to find other people in this space that are doing similar things, that are interested in similar technologies. And the community is relatively small,
yeah.
Right? I think you guys know this. And so finding those industry partners that you can leverage, where we can share war stories and lessons learned, and figure out ways to leverage the data that's around us. Because I might do this, full time, but I'm doing it specifically in the financial vertical. Someone that does it in the, physical security realm is different than somebody that's doing it for, the gas and power industry or whatever it might be. And we all learn these different lessons, tricks, techniques. And I just love, having a platform where we can chat about this stuff, because I feel like the best way to learn is from each other.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, I appreciate you guys having me here.
Yeah, well, let's put you on the list to keep coming back. And hey, we're just launching this podcast. We don't even know if anybody's going to ever like it. Let's hope so. But you know, if it's just a small sliver of candor for an overly marketed universe, I'm hoping it's going to be good.